What's good, everybody? What's good? It's your boy, Cardinal Bud Crawford. Or you can call me E.S. Red. And we're back for another one. Alright, y'all. We got a new topic for today. New topic. Game planning. How Terence Bud Crawford trapped Errol Spence into a Jaron Ennis mandatory fight. Alright, y'all, so you know, in every sport it's all about game plan. In every sport, you know, you gotta go in to your, you know, basketball game, football game, baseball game, hockey, boxing. You know, you gotta go in with some type of strategy. And boxing is I think is the pinnacle. I think combat sports in general are the pinnacle of strategy games, you know, because it's extremely dangerous. You know, you could get hurt permanently. You could definitely get embarrassed. Or Rolly Romero. But the biggest thing is you could get hurt permanently playing this strategy game. So if you don't go into the, you know, into any, you know, negotiating process, any planning of your next fight without the right game plan, then you're subject to end up in a horrible situation. Now, we know everybody not everybody, most boxing fans, they're looking forward to this Spence Crawford fight. You know, boxing in the last 10 years has been on a downslope. You know, we've had good fights, but overall it's been on a downward trend. And it's becoming to the point where not getting the fight fans want is the norm. It's the normal in boxing. You know, not getting the fight that you want is now normal in boxing. It's almost like they're purposely doing this to fans. They know that they can get your money out of your pocket just by putting on a certain caliber of fight, or facing a fighter up with a lesser opponent just to get a knockout for the fighter that you like. And a lot of times the fights we end up with are not the fights people actually want to see. They're just filler fights, or they're gimme fights, or they're fights that a certain promoter puts together because it's an in-house fight. And a lot of times, you know, it leaves a bad taste in fans' mouths, because as a boxing fan, you know, we only get these fights maybe twice a year. You might get to see your favorite fighter maybe twice a year at the most. You know, we got spoiled with guys like Pacquiao, because Pacquiao used to fight a lot. But, you know, nowadays you might see your favorite fighter twice a year. They're getting huge checks, and they really don't have to get into the ring with the best competition. They can get into the ring with almost like a nobody and still make money. And it's to the point where boxing fans are just moving on. They're going to MMA. They're finding other forms of combat sports, or just other sports in general, to occupy their time. And you know, the Errol Spence Terence Crawford fight was supposed to be one of those sports saving fights. You know, kind of like the Manny Pacquiao Floyd Mayweather fight was supposed to be that defining fight for the sport. And what we ended up getting was a fight that was way past his prime, a fight that was set up for one guy to win, a fight that should have taken place probably 5 to 10 years before it actually did. And it's sad to see two new guys and two of the best of today kind of repeating the same cycle of the past. And because this only seems to happen in boxing, it has to be a situation of there's either too much money involved in these fights, or there needs to be one entity controlling how they match make fights, you know. And I know that's impossible with boxing because you got promoters, you got independent fighters, you got fighters overseas, you got all this, you know, all these variables in the way of one entity controlling the sport. But if there was one entity controlling the sport and making and forcing certain matchups, we would always get the fights that we want to see, and we wouldn't have to go through these processes of having 5, 10, 15 years between super fights, or at least number 1 facing up with number 2, or number 2 facing up with number 3. It should not be this way. And, you know, at this point, how could you fix, you know, there really is no way of fixing the sport. And this Errol Spence, Terence Crawford situation with the contract, and Terence Crawford not wanting to sign off. Now, I've stated a lot of facts about this fight. You know, a lot of things have been said about what could possibly be going on with the holdup of this fight. And, you know, I'm at the point to where I'm starting to believe that he's not, and I'm talking about Terence Crawford, he's not actually holding out for more money in the actual Errol Spence Terence Crawford contract, but maybe he's actually trying to hold out to get a full-fledged contract from PBC or another promotional company before he actually decides to sign off on this fight. Maybe he doesn't feel like his lawyers are competent, or his team is competent enough to put him in the right position to win in this fight, and he feels like he has to hold off. And by doing that, I'm getting to the point, by doing that, he's kind of, and I've talked about this before, he's kind of trapped Errol Spence in a situation to where he's either got to move up in weight and fight someone, or he has to stay and fight the next guy up. And the next guy up is actually Jaron Ennis, because he's the IBF mandatory. And, you know, I would say, in playing strategy game, once again, you know, boxing is a strategy game, that's a great strategy by Terence Crawford. It's an excellent way to get yourself out of a fight you feel like that's not set up for you to win, and to force your opponent that you would have faced up with in that fight into what a lot of people consider a tougher fight with a younger, better version of Terence Crawford. So it's almost like, you know, Terence Crawford, I won't say that he ducked his way. You know, he ducked his way out of this fight and decided that, you know, the ducking would actually put him in a better position, because once again, Jaron Ennis could soften Spence up. He could perhaps injure Spence. You know, that would be a amazing matchup. Now, it wouldn't make him as much money as a Crawford-Spence fight would, but it would make boxing fans extremely happy, because Jaron Ennis, to a lot of people, is considered the next guy up. And if he was to actually face off with Errol Spence Jr., oh boy, would that be a heck of a matchup. And it could be potentially a 50-50 fight, because a lot of people do consider Jaron Ennis a better version of Terence Crawford. And, I mean, it could go two ways. You know, Jaron Ennis could soften Spence up. He could actually beat Spence. Or Spence could beat Ennis convincingly. If he was to beat Ennis convincingly, then you would have to start asking yourself, what does Terence Crawford do now? Because Terence Crawford's already in a situation where he hasn't fought in almost a year, maybe right at a year, and he's going to have to start thinking about his mandatories that are coming up, and his, you know, who does he fight next? You know, he might have an easier road when it comes to mandatories because he's only holding one belt, but it could be a situation to where he sets himself up, because if we do get a Jaron Ennis Errol Spence matchup and Errol Spence beats Ennis convincingly, then I think he destroys Terence Crawford. And it might end up in a situation where you see Terence Crawford start to think about dropping titles and just moving on to a different weight class, maybe even going back down in weight, and which would be crazy because we've waited so long for this matchup, and if we don't actually get it, you know, what does that say about Terence Crawford at the end of the day? I've already had my reserved feelings about Crawford and the fact that he's ducked quite a few fights, not just this Errol Spence fight, but the Pacquiao fight, the Ugas fight. He's almost the king of ducking at this point, and he's forcing boxing into a situation to where it's going to have a black eye in the eye of fans. It's going to have a black eye in the eye of fans. It's basically, you know, and he's turning his own fans off at the end of the day too. Not only fans who casually watch him or casually like him, but his own fans are going to end up becoming disgruntled against him because he's not putting on the type of shows and accepting the type of fights, the tough fights that people want to see him in. He's only choosing to take fights he knows he can win, and he's making himself look worse and worse and worse by doing that. Now, if this Jaron Ennis situation actually does come to fruition, and Errol Spence does beat Jaron Ennis, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I'm gonna say the Terence Crawford fight might not happen at all, and if it does, you can look at Terence Crawford as retiring after that fight, especially if Errol Spence beats Jaron Ennis convincingly. I would have no doubt in my mind at that point that, you know, Terence Crawford would be not only afraid, but most likely retiring after that. So let me know what y'all think about that down in the comment section below. Hit that like button for me. Share, subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You're more than likely to get a response on YouTube, so holler at me over there if you want a response. It's your boy, Cardinal Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me. And I think we are out of here.
Got the dice game going in the breezeway.